I'm here with John Schlesinger, who heads up the enterprise architecture practice at Atos Consulting. John, I was reading on nextpracticeadvisory.com an article you'd written on a concept called one-level enterprise. I wonder if you could explain a little bit more about what you mean by one-level enterprise.
Yes, this is probably the hardest of our approaches to explain because it's not what we're used to. But again, it's something I discovered practically and have used to advantage since. It all springs from a very simple fact, which is every business system has a unique business owner.
Needs to have or actually has?
Both. There always is a business owner for a business system. Sometimes the way we think of business systems makes it look like there's no owner or two, but there's always, in fact, a business owner. And in fact, the fact that we have difficulty saying who the business owner for business systems, it just reflects the fact that we don't pay enough attention to it.
Not the fact that there isn't one.
Not the fact that there isn't
I understand,
one.
right.
The other thing is that we're beguiled by the organisation chart, right? Because the organisation chart represents the political will of the chief executive, and we're all interested in what the chief executive wants.
So indeed, when you ask the question, what does the organisation look like, what do you get given?
You get given the organisation chart. But in fact, that's not really what the organisation looks like. What the organisation looks like is very different. You can take the organisation chart, that hierarchy, and draw a line through it, showing the level at which the business systems are actually owned. So I was working in a capital markets broker, and they had a debt division and an equities division. And business systems were owned at the level of equities in the equities division, but they were owned a level down in debt because they wanted to have separate ownership of different debt instruments, sovereign debt, corporate debt, derivatives, mortgages, and foreign exchange.
Seems sensible on one level.
Yeah. So a way of thinking of that is that what we do at one level is we take the organisation chart, find that line, and then project that down onto a two-dimensional view of the enterprise, showing all the ownership of business systems in their business ownership domains.
Right, so if you had a large Perspex cube, which represented in reality in 3 dimensions the organisation, and you sort of projected that in 2 dimensionals,
yes,
that's what you'd find.
Yes, it's almost like the holographic principle in physics. But
Perhaps a subject for another talk, John, yes.
So, in fact, when customers ask for as-is or next-state views of the enterprise, that's the one I like to do first, the business ownership view. And then what I like to add on to the business ownership view is the business events that are exchanged between domains, because they represent the business agreements that IT is implementing on behalf of the business.
What is a business agreement, or could you give an example of what a business agreement means when manifested?
Yeah, so if I'm an online retailer and my website is taking orders, and I need to send those orders to a warehouse to be dispatched, then there has to be an agreement between the system sending the orders and the system receiving the orders as to how that agreement, how that message arrives, when it comes, how it's serviced, and so on. And without that agreement working, the business will crumble.
So the way the business works can be boiled down to events, stuff happening,
Mm-hmm.
and agreements. In other words, the understanding that different parts of the organisation have to what to do with that event.
Exactly. And in fact, that's the implementing the value chain in the business using IT, is that set of agreements.
So where does this where does this lead back to the one-level enterprise concept?
The fact that these agreements occur between these business ownership domains, and very often what you see is the one level in the enterprise is that agreements being made at a level too low, and they're not being managed by the business as business things, but being managed by IT as IT things, and that's usually a source of problems. So one way of tidying up the enterprise architecture and making things run much more smoothly is to physically implement the concept of the domain, promote all those agreements to a domain level, right, and then do them that way. And that way you achieve what I call the goal of integration, which is being able to put any service on any channel and not having services hardwired to specific applications. So that gives you flexibility.
So it seems to me from what you're talking about, the concept of one-level enterprise, is not that it's a good nor a bad thing, but it is just an inevitable thing in any organisation, and one that you must recognise and plan respecting.
Yes, and I've been very successful with banks, showing them how this works and explain to them that they should physically implement the domains.
And what would and these domains are presumably defined by business function.
Absolutely, the business defines what they are. And in fact, the reason capital markets did this first and best is because that's the area where the business had the most control over its IT. Where IT is strong and business managers relatively weak, you see very poor implementation of domains to the detriment of the enterprise.
Is the role of IT or an enterprise architect who sits within the IT group educating the business as well as the IT function as to these phenomena?
I think so, yes. And showing how if you do things, if you respect the inevitable truth of the enterprise, that you get things done get things done better. You can actually implement things faster and be more flexible.
How do you find out what the so-called truth of the enterprise is? Is it a case of going around independently and asking a load of questions of the people who really make the business work, or are there other techniques you can use?
No, interviewing is the major technique. You have to just go and ask. And we use the hypothesis-driven approach. So you create a hypothesis, and you take that round, and people will say, "Oh yeah, that's true," or "No, actually, that's not quite right," and you get it adjusted.
So you have a sort of a straw man to start off with, which can be proven or disproven, but is not necessarily anyone's opinion. It's just something that could be true.
Yes, exactly.
Which is exactly what a hypothesis is, of course.
Exactly. Right. And by doing your interviews based on a hypothesis, you get a much sharper interview.
I think we'll have another talk on hypothesis-based issue consulting later. John, thank you very much. More of this can be found on nextpracticeadvisory.com.
Thank you very much.